Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to U.S. History for today. And today we're going to be talking about weapons and tactics in the Civil War. So before we get to the Civil War, let's talk about warfare prior to the Civil War. And let's talk about weapons. And the primary weapon for a long, long time, since firearms had basically been invented, was this basically some permutation of a what was called a smoothbore musket. The smoothbore musket was a weapon that, by the time we get to the 1700s, 1800s, is a weapon where you load it via the muzzle. So you have to like put it down on the ground, the butt end of it, and pour powder down the barrel of the muzzle. There you have what's called a ramrod that you use to tamp that powder down. You put down a ball, a smooth musket ball, down in there, made of lead, and then it's engaged via a piece of flint, creating a spark. And it lights the powder and it explodes. The smoothbore musket was not very accurate. The accuracy was about 100 yards when it's all said and done. And so these weapons were what was used, in the American Civil War, in the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, or not the American. Well, they are somewhat used in the Civil War. I meant the American Revolution. My bad. So these weapons were used in all of those conflicts, and in conflicts going back, the British were really skilled at using them. The Americans were fairly skilled by the time we get to the American Civil War, but they still weren't very accurate. And so it required, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to tactics, but it required people to basically line up, and you wanted as much fire as possible going toward your enemy, with the hope that something would hit something, and you could advance. This is why European warfare for generations had relied upon lines of some shape or form to advance in warfare. But when we get to the Civil War, we're going to see a couple of advances in weapons. The first one are these. These are what are called mini balls. And I know they don't look like balls at all. They look like the bullets that we kind of know today. And essentially they kind of were. They were cone-shaped. And so what's going to go farther? Something that's cone-shaped or something that is round? The cone-shaped thing. It's more aerodynamic. So these mini balls were able to travel further, and they were a bit more accurate, especially when you combined them with with a rifle. And so these were muzzle, or these did not load from the muzzle. They loaded from the middle of the weapon, down by where you're firing, and that enabled. So that in and of itself was a tremendous advantage. You didn't have to put the darn thing down on the ground. You didn't have to use a ramrod. By the end of the war, we're going to have actual cartridges. You're going to have weapons that you can load 7 rounds in and fire. The apparently the saying was that you could load it on Sunday and fire all week, because it was seven shots. But so you had that, and then also these new Civil War era weapons also had rifling in the barrels. So these were what were called rifles. Rifling are grooves that are etched, carved into the barrel that will spin the round. So imagine you're out on a field with Dave Dickinson, okay, who was probably the greatest quarterback to ever come through CMR and University of Montana, and he played up in Canada for a couple of teams, and now he's the coach of the Chargers, or the whatever the Canadian the Calgary team is. Anyway, so imagine you're out on a field with Dave Dickinson, and you have a basketball and you have a football, and you ask Dave to throw those objects as far as he possibly can. Which one's going to go further, the football or the basketball? It's going to be the football, right? Because, number one, cone-shaped, more aerodynamic than the basketball that you're kind of shot putting, basically. And you can also, a good thrower like Dave, or somebody that actually knows how to throw a football, not me, can apply a spin to that ball. And that's going to make it go further and be far more accurate. It's the same way with the mini balls in the rifles. This is going to mean instead of having about a 100-yard accurate range, you're going to have an accurate range that is 200, 300 or more yards. And so that's going to lead to more people being hit, and that's going to lead to far more deadly outcomes. And the same thing is going to kind of happen with artillery pieces, with cannons. You're going to see, instead of prior to this, you had these big, imagine cannonballs like what you see in Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever you want to watch. Now in the Civil War, you have these more cone-shaped, more aerodynamic pieces. And the other thing that you have with artillery is some of it they have now rigged to explode in air, and those pieces would be filled with scrap metal, mini balls, basically whatever metal they could get their hands on. And so when it explodes, it creates what we call shrapnel. And that shrapnel can damage lots and lots of soldiers at the same time. So this was a real advance in artillery. I thought I had... Oh, here, we're going to go back to tactics. But you also have advances in naval technology. You have the first, what were called iron-sided ships in service. The Confederates had one. It was called the Merrimack, at least one. The Merrimack was their first one. And then the Union had, their first one was called the Monitor. This is going to be the end of wood ships. By the time we get to America's next military conflict, which was the Spanish-American War, there are really not going to be any more wooden ships in navies except as like display pieces. You're going to have metal ships that are going to be in service in navies around the world by the time we get to the Spanish-American War. Even the Spanish had them at this point, and they were a pretty low-grade power by the end of the 1800s. So here they did meet in one battle, and it was kind of a draw. Neither one of them could be sunk. The Virginia, the Merrimack, is the one in the further ground, the mid range there, and then the Monitor is the one in the near range, and the Monitor always to me looks like sort of a prototype of a submarine or something like that, because it's so low. These ships were so heavy because what they had was basically iron and they didn't have a way to make lots and lots of steel very quickly. That's going to come after the Civil War. So these ships were literally iron-sided, and so they're going to displace so much water that they're really, really low to the water when they're out sailing. That's going to change again by the time we get to the Spanish-American War. It's going to be more steel than iron being used. And this is just a picture of the Merrimack in a dry dock, so you can kind of see what the underside sort of would have looked like. I mean, obviously it's not a picture; it's a drawing, but you get kind of an idea. It looks very modern, all things considered. It looks very much like a modern ship. And then here's the monitor, similarly, just sort of a schematic looking thing, but again, incredibly modern design for the Civil War that you think about as this sort of old-timey conflict. I mean, this ship looks like it could belong in a modern navy today. Okay, so going back to tactics there. So as I kind of alluded to previously, both of these sides, warfare prior to this point was lining up in lines and firing at each other. This was what they knew. This was how they had been drilled. And the commanders, because they were the oldest, most trained people in a military force, this is how they're going to tell their soldiers to fight. The idea was whoever basically had the most troops standing at the end of the conflict is the winner. And so the idea was throw a wall of human flesh against a wall of human flesh. And the problem with that is the new weapons, the rifles, the artillery, things like that are going to create a far more deadly battlefield than what had existed prior to this. The fact that these rifles could be reloaded, some of them by the end of the war are repeating rifles that you can fire 6-7 shots at a time, or one right after the other in succession, I should say. There we go. This was a massive thing. And again, artillery improving, replacing the cannonballs. The cannonballs, I mean, if it landed right next to you, it would do some damage, but probably not much if it hit you directly. But these artillery shells could explode. They could do a lot of damage and have that shrapnel effect that we certainly know today from any kind of explosive pipe bombs or whatever. That's kind of the idea, is to do as much damage as possible. Sorry, I didn't realize I had placed those other slides in the wrong locations. To return to the weapon thing real quick, this is a picture, a drawing of actually a Confederate notion. This was basically the first submarine, and it was developed by the Confederates. It was used, but not tremendously successfully, as I'm recalling it. It tried to capsize in one of its first missions. But this will lead to small submarines, and by the time we get to, World War I, the Germans are using full-size submarines to do tremendous damage to the navies of the British and the French and later the Americans. So, this leads to some tremendous advances in naval warfare. I don't think we can imagine naval warfare today without submarines. I apparently put the tactics things back, and so we don't have to belabor this. Of course, I think I was starting here and something about Civil War, but again, lines run at each other. The bayonets were really, really effective in the close combat. Basically, you had something on the end of a stick that you could stab people with. Many of the soldiers also carried swords, especially the commanders, and they could fight with swords, as you see from the Confederate commander there on the one side. And again, this just led to massive amounts of death. Thousands of people killed in every battle is what we're essentially looking at here. Okay, so we're going to stop there as far as my video is concerned, but I have some other things for you to watch about this. And then when you, near the end of the period, I just want you to reflect on what you learned today and answer me the question of how did the combination of new weapons and old tactics lead to death on a massive scale in the Civil War. Okay, so I'll write that question up on the board for you, but that's what I want you to do, and just hang on to that. We're going to do some of this writing, and so if you do it on paper, just hang on to that sheet of paper. You can do it on your Chromebooks, just start a document, and I'll collect it once we're done with all the notes. I'm going to have you do some other writing. Okay, thanks, guys.